Hello, my friend. Tonight we're traveling back more than 700 years to a small medieval town where the comforting smell of fresh bread drifts through narrow streets long before sunrise. It sounds peaceful, doesn't it? A quiet little bakery, warm ovens, fresh loaves cooling on wooden shelves. Perhaps you're imagining a simple life filled with pleasant routines. But the reality was very different. Being a medieval baker was one of the hardest and most exhausting occupations in Europe. The work began while nearly everyone else was still asleep, and it often ended long after sunset. There were no electric mixers, no timers, no modern ovens, and certainly no weekends. Tonight, we'll gently explore what it was truly like to spend just one ordinary week in the shoes of a medieval baker. As always, settle into a comfortable position, relax your shoulders, and let the slow rhythm of history carry you away. Imagine that it is the year 1325. You live inside a bustling English market town. The streets are narrow and muddy. Most homes are built from timber frames filled with woven branches and clay. Smoke rises lazily from hundreds of chimneys. The smell, well, it isn't exactly pleasant. Animals wander freely through the streets. Horse manure mixes with rainwater. Open drains carry waste along the roadside. Fresh bread may smell wonderful, but it competes with many less delightful aromas. Your house is tiny. You share it with your family. Perhaps 6 or 7 people sleep inside a single room. Your bed is little more than a straw mattress covered by rough wool blankets. There are no alarm clocks. You don't need one. Your work begins long before dawn. You wake because your body has learned the schedule, or perhaps because your apprentice accidentally makes too much noise preparing yesterday's firewood. Outside, the stars still shine overhead. Most people remain asleep, but not bakers. Never bakers. Bread is one of the most important foods in medieval Europe. Nearly everyone eats it every day. Rich or poor, farmer or knight, priest or merchant. Without bread, many families simply cannot survive. That means the town depends on you. No pressure. The first task is preparing the fire. Modern ovens heat quickly. Medieval ovens do not. Large stone ovens require hours to reach the proper temperature. You carefully stack dry wood inside. Then comes the slow work of lighting the fire. Tiny sparks become dancing flames. Soon the oven begins storing heat inside thick stone walls. You cannot rush this process. Patience is everything. While the fire grows stronger, you begin mixing dough. Forget shiny metal bowls, forget electric mixers. Everything is done by hand. Large wooden troughs hold flour. Water comes from nearby wells. Salt is expensive. Yeast isn't packaged neatly in little envelopes. Instead, you rely on sourdough starters carefully maintained for years. If your starter dies, your bakery may stop producing bread altogether. You pour water into the flour, slowly, carefully. Then comes kneading, again and again and again. Your arms quickly become tired, but there is still much more dough waiting. By sunrise, you've already worked for several hours. Most townspeople are only beginning to wake. For you, half the morning has already disappeared, and unfortunately, the hardest work hasn't even begun by now. The first faint light of morning has begun to appear over the rooftops of your little medieval town. Most people are only just beginning to wake. A farmer stretches before heading toward the fields. A merchant slowly opens the wooden shutters of his shop. Children are still asleep beneath heavy wool blankets. But for you, the day has already been going for several hours. The oven has finally reached the right temperature. The thick stone walls now hold an incredible amount of heat. There are no thermostats, no temperature gauges, no timers. Everything depends on experience. You judge the heat by the color of the bricks, the feel of the warmth on your face, and years of practice. One mistake could ruin an entire day's work. Too hot, and every loaf burns. Too cool, and the bread remains raw in the middle. Neither option is acceptable. Carefully, you sweep the burning embers from the oven floor using a long wooden rake. Ash drifts gently into the air. The heat is almost overwhelming. Even in the middle of winter, standing beside the oven feels like standing under the summer sun. Sweat quickly forms across your forehead. The work has barely begun. One by one, you place each loaf inside using a long wooden peel. Every movement must be smooth, fast, but careful. Each loaf needs enough space to expand while baking. Too close together, and they stick. Too far apart, and valuable oven space is wasted. Bread is your livelihood. Every loaf matters. Outside, the streets are becoming busier. The smell of fresh bread slowly drifts through the town. For many families, this familiar scent signals the beginning of another ordinary day. To them, it smells comforting. To you, it smells like long hours of labor. As the first batch bakes, there is no time to rest. More dough must be prepared immediately. Tomorrow's bread depends on today's work. There is always another bowl to mix, another sack of flour to lift, another table to clean. The work never truly stops. Large bags of flour are surprisingly heavy. Some weigh as much as a grown man. Without modern equipment, every sack must be carried by hand. Your shoulders ache, your back protests. Your hands are already rough from years of kneading dough. Small cuts cover your fingers. The flour dries your skin until it cracks. Burn marks from hot trays decorate your forearms. No one notices these injuries. They are simply part of being a baker. Throughout the morning, customers begin arriving. Some are wealthy merchants. Others are poor laborers. Everyone wants fresh bread. Some customers are patient. Others are not. If the bread isn't ready exactly when expected, complaints soon follow. A hungry town can become an impatient town. You smile politely. After all, customers pay your bills. Coins are counted carefully. Every loaf has value. Bread is not cheap to produce. Wood for the oven costs money. Flour costs money. Salt costs money. Even maintaining your sourdough starter requires constant attention. A single accident could destroy days of preparation. Imagine dropping your starter. Imagine contamination. Imagine spoiled flour after heavy rain. Such disasters could threaten an entire bakery. And remember, there are no refrigerators, no electric fans, no modern storage rooms. Everything depends on the weather. A warm, humid week can spoil ingredients. A poor harvest can double the price of grain. Suddenly, making bread becomes far more difficult. By midday, the bakery feels almost unbearable. The stone oven continues radiating heat into every corner of the room. The air becomes thick and dry. Flour hangs gently in the sunlight, streaming through small windows. Each breath carries tiny particles into your lungs. Historians believe many bakers developed breathing problems after years spent working in these dusty conditions. Yet there is little choice. People need bread, and bread must be made. The hours continue passing. You barely notice them. Knead, shape, bake, carry, sell, repeat, again and again and again. It is a rhythm that rarely changes. Unlike many modern jobs, there are no weekends, no paid vacations, no sick leave. If you stop working, the bakery stops earning. If the bakery stops earning, your family may struggle to eat. Responsibility follows you every single day. Even while eating your own meal, your eyes remain fixed on the oven. One loaf left inside too long can undo an entire morning of hard work. Perhaps this is why medieval bakers became so skilled. They had to be. Their profession demanded patience, strength, and constant attention. By late afternoon, another wave of customers arrives. Some purchase bread for supper, others prepare for tomorrow's journey. Travelers often buy large round loaves because they last longer than softer breads. Nothing goes to waste. Even stale bread has value. Hard bread can be soaked in soup, ground into crumbs, or fed to animals. Waste is a luxury few medieval families can afford. As the sun slowly begins to sink toward the horizon, your body grows heavier, your arms feel tired, your feet ache from standing on rough stone floors all day. Smoke clings stubbornly to your clothes. Flour covers nearly everything you own. You have worked for more than 14 hours, and tomorrow you will wake before dawn to do it all over again. For most people today, that schedule would seem impossible, but in medieval Europe, it was simply another ordinary day inside a bakery. And somehow, this exhausting routine continued day after day, year after year, for generations. Now, the bakery has settled into its steady rhythm. The first customers have already come and gone. Fresh loaves rest upon wooden shelves, their golden crusts still warm from the stone oven. To us today, bread is often just another item on the grocery list. White, whole wheat, sourdough, perhaps even gluten-free. But in medieval Europe, bread was far more than food. It was survival. It was comfort. It was wealth. And sometimes, it quietly revealed exactly where a person belonged in society. If you walked through a medieval marketplace, you could often guess someone's social status simply by looking at the bread they carried. The wealthiest families enjoyed beautiful white loaves. These were made from finely sifted wheat flour. The milling process removed the darker bran and coarse pieces of grain, leaving behind soft, pale flour. It produced bread that was light, airy, and pleasant to eat, but creating such flour required extra work, more time, and better quality grain. Naturally, it was expensive. For nobles, wealthy merchants, and members of the clergy, white bread became a symbol of status. Serving it at the table quietly announced that your family could afford the very best. The poor, however, lived a very different reality. Their bread was rarely white. Instead, it was dark, dense, and heavy, made from rye, barley, oats, or whatever grain happened to survive the year's harvest. Sometimes, different grains were mixed together. Other times, peas, beans, or even crushed acorns found their way into the dough. The goal was simple: stretch the flour, feed the family, survive another day. The taste was not always pleasant. The texture could be rough. Some loaves were so hard, they needed to be softened in broth before they could be eaten comfortably. Yet few people complained, because hunger was far worse. A single loaf might need to feed an entire family. Parents often gave the largest pieces to their children. Adults quietly accepted smaller portions. No one knew exactly when the next harvest would come, or whether it would be successful. Good weather meant full granaries. Bad weather could bring famine, too much rain, and crops rotted in the fields. Too little rain, and nothing grew. One poor harvest could affect an entire kingdom. Suddenly, bread became scarce. Prices rose. Queues outside bakeries grew longer. People worried, not about luxury, but about survival. Bread also played an important role at every meal. Breakfast was simple. Perhaps a small piece of bread with a little cheese or leftover porridge. Lunch, if there was one, might include bread dipped into vegetable soup. Dinner often consisted of stew with thick slices of bread used almost like spoons. After soaking in warm broth, the bread absorbed every drop of flavor. Nothing was wasted. Even stale bread remained valuable. Hard loaves could be broken into crumbs, cooked into puddings, fed to livestock, or reused in countless recipes. Waste was a luxury few families could afford. Some medieval households even used thick slices of stale bread as plates. Known today as trenchers, these sturdy pieces supported meat and vegetables during meals. Afterward, they might be eaten, given to servants, or donated to the poor. Simple, practical, nothing thrown away. For bakers, this meant understanding their customers. A wealthy merchant expected beautiful white bread with a crisp crust. A poor laborer needed affordable loaves that would feed a family for several days. The baker had to produce both. Every morning, different doughs were prepared, different recipes, different prices, different customers, yet every loaf carried the same responsibility: keeping someone alive. Perhaps that is why bread became deeply connected to religion as well. Throughout medieval Europe, bread appeared in churches, festivals, and sacred ceremonies. It represented gratitude, provision, and hope. To waste bread was considered disrespectful. Some families even kissed a fallen piece before placing it back on the table. Not because the loaf itself was magical, but because food was precious. Every crumb mattered. As evening approached, the last customers slowly left the bakery. Wooden shelves that had been full only hours earlier now stood nearly empty. Most of today's bread had already found a home. Tomorrow, the process would begin again. Before sunrise, new fires would be lit. Fresh dough would be mixed. More flour would cover the work tables. The cycle never truly ended, because as long as people lived, they needed bread. And as long as they needed bread, someone had to wake while the rest of the world still slept. Someone had to tend the fire. Someone had to knead the dough. Someone had to feed the town. Perhaps, for all its hardships, there was something quietly noble about the life of a medieval baker. Not rich, not famous, but essential. Without the baker, there was no bread. Without bread, there was no ordinary life. And in many ways, the history of bread is also the history of civilization itself. As the warm aroma of fresh bread drifted through the streets, most people never stopped to think about the rules behind every loaf. To them, bread simply appeared on the market table each morning. But behind every perfectly baked loaf stood a surprisingly complicated system of laws, inspections, and strict regulations. For a medieval baker, making bread was not simply about mixing flour and water, it was also about obeying the law. In many towns across England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire, bread was considered too important to leave entirely to chance. After all, almost everyone depended on it. If bakers cheated, thousands of people could suffer. And so, local governments watched them carefully. One of the oldest and most famous laws was known as the Assize of Bread, introduced in England during the 13th century. This law controlled both the weight and the price of bread. Unlike today, where prices often change according to supply and demand, medieval authorities believed bread should remain fair and predictable. Whenever the price of wheat increased, officials adjusted the required size of each loaf. If wheat became expensive, the loaf became smaller. If wheat became cheaper, the loaf became larger. The goal was simple: prevent fraud, protect ordinary people, and reduce the risk of unrest, because hungry citizens could quickly become angry citizens. Imagine yourself standing behind your wooden stall at the morning market. A town inspector approaches. He carries a small balance scale made of iron. Without saying much, he picks up one of your loaves. He places it carefully on the scale. Everyone nearby watches. If the loaf weighs exactly what the law requires, he nods and quietly moves on. But if it is too light, even by a small amount, your day could become very unpleasant. The punishment depended on the seriousness of the offense. Sometimes you paid a heavy fine. Sometimes your bread was confiscated, and in more serious cases, the punishment became public. One particularly embarrassing penalty involved being placed in the town's pillory. The pillory was a wooden frame that locked around your head and hands. It stood in the busiest part of town for hours, or even an entire day. People walked past. Some laughed, some pointed. Children sometimes threw rotten vegetables. Others mocked the unfortunate baker who had broken the law. For someone whose reputation depended on trust, public humiliation could be devastating. Yet not every mistake came from dishonesty. Baking with wood-fired ovens was unpredictable. A loaf might lose more moisture than expected. Another batch might rise differently because of changes in temperature. Even experienced bakers occasionally produced bread that weighed slightly less than intended. Still, the law rarely accepted excuses. Responsibility always rested with the baker, because bread mattered too much. To avoid problems, Many bakers developed an interesting habit. Rather than risk selling a loaf that might be slightly underweight, they sometimes added an extra loaf to large orders. This practice eventually became known as the baker's dozen. Instead of selling 12 loaves, the baker quietly included a 13th. It was a simple way to avoid accusations of cheating. Centuries later, the expression still survives. Most people today know the phrase. Without realizing it began inside medieval bakeries. Guilds also played an important role. A guild was an association of skilled craftsmen. Bakers joined together to protect their profession. The guild established quality standards. It trained apprentices, resolved disputes, and ensured that members followed local rules. Becoming a master baker was not easy. Young apprentices often spent many years learning the craft. They swept floors, carried heavy sacks of flour, prepared fires, mixed dough, and observed experienced bakers every single day. Only after proving their skills and earning the trust of the guild could they open a bakery of their own. This long training helped maintain quality, because in medieval society, a baker's reputation was everything. One dishonest act could destroy years of hard work. Customers remembered. Neighbors talked. Word spread quickly through small towns. Trust, once lost, was difficult to regain. There was another challenge as well. Some dishonest merchants tried to mix poor quality grain into their flour. Others secretly added chalk, ground beans, or other cheap ingredients. Not only did this produce inferior bread, it could also harm people's health. Inspectors looked for these tricks whenever they visited bakeries. A baker caught deliberately adulterating flour faced severe consequences. Sometimes, the punishment was financial. Sometimes, it ended a career. Despite all these rules, most bakers simply wanted to do honest work. They woke before dawn, worked beside blazing ovens, lifted heavy flour sacks, and provided food for hundreds of families. Their lives were already difficult enough. The law existed not to make life harder, but to protect one of society's most essential foods. As evening settled over the town, the inspector completed his rounds. The marketplace slowly emptied. Wooden stalls closed one by one. Inside the bakery, the last crumbs were swept from the floor. Tomorrow, everything would begin again. Another fire, another batch of dough, another careful inspection, another chance to prove that every loaf was worthy of the trust placed in the baker's hands. And perhaps, after such a long day, the greatest reward was not money or praise, but simply knowing that an entire community would wake tomorrow with fresh bread waiting for them. By now, the bakery has settled into its familiar rhythm. The morning rush has passed. Most of today's bread has already been sold. But inside the bakery, the greatest challenge has never been the customers, nor the town inspector. It has always been the fire. For a medieval baker, fire was both a trusted friend and a dangerous enemy. Without it, there would be no bread. But if it escaped the stone oven, it could destroy everything. Take a moment and imagine standing inside a medieval bakery. The room is dimly lit. Sunlight enters through only a few small windows. Most of the light comes from the glowing mouth of the great stone oven. Bright orange flames dance against blackened bricks. The heat is almost impossible to describe. Even in the middle of winter, the bakery feels like midsummer. Standing only a few steps from the oven, your face becomes warm almost immediately. Another step closer, and the heat presses against your skin like an invisible wall. Your clothes quickly become damp with sweat. There are no electric fans, no air conditioning, no ventilation systems, only open windows, if the weather allows. The air grows thick with smoke, warm ash, and tiny particles of flour floating through the room. Every breath reminds you where you work. The oven itself is a remarkable piece of engineering. Built from heavy stone and clay, it stores heat for many hours. Before baking can begin, the oven must first be filled with firewood. The flames burn for several hours, heating the thick walls until they glow with stored energy. Only then are the burning logs removed. The baker carefully sweeps away the glowing embers. The stone floor remains incredibly hot, ready to bake dozens of loaves using nothing more than the heat trapped inside the walls. It is an elegant system, simple, efficient, and surprisingly effective. But it is also dangerous. Every movement around the oven demands complete attention. One careless step, and your hand brushes against burning stone. One moment of distraction, and your arm touches the hot metal tools. Burns are common. Small burns, large burns, fresh burns layered over older scars. Most bakers carried these marks for life. There were no protective gloves made from heat-resistant materials, no insulated aprons. Most wore little more than thick linen clothing and leather shoes. Their hands, the most valuable tools they possessed, were also the most exposed. Even lifting bread into the oven required remarkable skill. Using a long wooden peel, the baker gently slides each loaf across the hot stone floor. The movement must be smooth, too fast, and the loaf may collapse, too slow, and the baker risks leaning dangerously close to the intense heat. Experienced bakers made it look easy, but years of practice stood behind every graceful movement. Fire presented another danger, one far more terrifying. The bakery itself was usually surrounded by wooden buildings. Roofs were often covered with straw or wooden shingles. A single spark carried by the wind could become a disaster. Entire medieval towns sometimes burned because one small fire spread from house to house. People feared fire almost as much as they feared disease. For this reason, many towns established strict rules about ovens and chimneys. Some required bakers to inspect their ovens regularly. Others limited where bakeries could be built. Even with these precautions, fires still happened. Buckets of water stood nearby whenever possible, not because they could easily stop a large fire, but because every second mattered. When flames appeared, everyone helped. Neighbors rushed from their homes, children carried water, men formed long lines passing buckets from wells. Women gathered valuable belongings before the flames reached their homes. Fire was not one family's problem. It belonged to the entire town. Inside the bakery, the danger never truly disappeared. Even after the day's final loaf had been baked, the oven remained hot, sometimes for many hours. The baker carefully checked every corner before leaving. A forgotten ember, hidden beneath ashes, could continue burning long into the night. Responsibility followed the baker until the very end of each day. Working in such heat also exhausted the body. Without modern understanding of dehydration, many bakers simply endured constant thirst. Sweat soaked their clothing. Their muscles weakened. Yet the work continued. There were no scheduled breaks, no comfortable chairs waiting in an air-conditioned room. Only another batch of dough, another oven to tend, another customer waiting outside. Even breathing became difficult. Flour filled the air like fine dust, day after day, year after year. Tiny particles entered the lungs. Historians believe many bakers developed long-term breathing problems because of these working conditions. Yet few had the opportunity to choose another profession. Most remained bakers for life. Often, their children became bakers as well. The knowledge passed quietly from one generation to the next. A father teaching his son, a master guiding his apprentice, not through books, but through observation. Feel the heat, watch the dough, listen to the crackling fire, smell the bread. These lessons could not easily be written. They had to be experienced. Perhaps this is why medieval baking became both an art and a science. Every oven behaved a little differently. Every piece of wood burned at its own pace. Every season changed the way dough rose. The best bakers learned to notice the smallest details, the color of the flames, the sound of crackling wood, the smell of baked crust, the warmth against their face. These quiet observations often meant the difference between success and failure. As evening slowly settled across the town, the fire inside the bakery finally began to fade. The brilliant orange glow softened into deep red embers. The room became quieter. Only the occasional crack from cooling stone broke the silence. The baker sat for a brief moment. His hands were tired. His back ached. His clothes carried the smell of smoke. But another day's work had been completed. Tomorrow, before the first bird greeted the sunrise, the fire would burn once again, and the endless cycle would quietly begin all over again. The first rays of sunlight have now climbed above the rooftops of the town. The bakery is no longer quiet. Fresh bread has been baked. The shelves are full. The hard work of making the bread is finished. But another important task is about to begin: selling it. Imagine stepping outside the bakery, carrying a large wicker basket filled with warm loaves. Steam still rises gently from the crust. The smell is rich, earthy, and comforting. Within moments, people notice. The aroma of fresh bread drifts through the streets, drawing hungry customers from every direction. The medieval marketplace is beginning to awaken. Wooden stalls line the narrow square. Merchants carefully arrange their goods. A butcher sharpens his knife. A fish seller lays today's catch on wet wooden boards. Nearby, a potter proudly displays newly fired bowls and jugs. The blacksmith's hammer echoes through the air. Children weave between the stalls, laughing as they chase one another. Dogs sniff for scraps. Chickens wander freely beneath wooden carts. It is noisy, busy, and wonderfully alive. For the baker, this is the most important part of the day. Every loaf that remains unsold represents lost income. Bread is best when fresh. Tomorrow's customers expect today's bread, not yesterday's. As people gather around the bakery stall, each customer has different needs. A wealthy merchant orders several soft white loaves for his household. He examines each one carefully, looking at the color of the crust, the shape, and even the smell. Quality matters. Nearby, a farmer counts a handful of worn copper coins. He can only afford one dark rye loaf. It must feed his family until tomorrow. The baker understands. Not every customer can buy the finest bread. Some mothers arrive carrying small children. The little ones stare eagerly at the warm loaves. Perhaps they have smelled fresh bread all morning. Perhaps breakfast was small. The baker smiles kindly, handing over a loaf still warm from the oven. Moments like these remind him why his work matters. Travelers also visit the market. Some have walked for days. Others lead horses loaded with wool, salt, or wine. Before leaving town again, they purchase sturdy round loaves that will survive long journeys. Hard bread travels well. Soft bread does not. Every loaf has its purpose. Of course, not every customer is easy to satisfy. One complains that yesterday's loaf was too hard. Another believes today's price is too high. A third insists another bakery sells larger loaves. The baker listens patiently. Arguing rarely solves anything. A good reputation is worth more than a single sale. In a small medieval town, everyone knows everyone. News travels quickly. One satisfied customer may bring 5 more. One unhappy customer can discourage an entire neighborhood. Trust becomes one of the baker's most valuable possessions. As the morning continues, the market grows busier. Church bells ring in the distance. Farmers arrive from nearby villages. Carts creak beneath heavy loads of vegetables, grain, and firewood. The square fills with conversation. Different accents mix together. Different languages can sometimes be heard from traveling merchants. The marketplace is more than a place to buy food. It is where news travels. A royal messenger has passed through a neighboring town. A bridge has collapsed after heavy rain. A noble family plans to host a grand feast. The wheat harvest looks promising this year. Or perhaps the harvest has failed. Every conversation matters, because nearly every piece of news eventually affects the price of bread. The baker listens while serving customers. If grain becomes scarce, he must prepare for difficult weeks ahead. If merchants bring fresh wheat from distant regions, perhaps prices will fall. Every loaf depends upon events happening far beyond the bakery walls. By midday, the warm smell of bread has spread across the entire marketplace. Only a few loaves remain. The baker breathes a quiet sigh of relief. A successful morning means his family will have enough money to purchase more flour, more firewood, and perhaps a little cheese or dried fish for supper. Yet success never lasts forever. Some days are slower. Heavy rain keeps customers at home. Poor harvests leave families without money. Disease empties the streets. During times of plague, markets become frighteningly quiet. The baker still rises before dawn, still lights the oven, still prepares the dough, but fewer footsteps approach the stall. Fewer coins exchange hands. Hope becomes as important as skill. As afternoon slowly fades, the marketplace begins to empty. Wooden carts roll toward nearby villages. Merchants carefully pack away their goods. Children grow tired. The voices become softer. The square slowly returns to silence. Back inside the bakery, only a handful of loaves remain. These may feed the baker's own family. Some will be saved for soup. Others may be given to neighbors in need. Nothing is wasted. Not in a world where every harvest is uncertain. The baker wipes flour from the wooden counter. He counts the day's earnings carefully. A few silver coins, several copper pennies. Enough to continue, enough to wake before dawn once again. As the sun disappears beyond the rooftops, he closes the heavy wooden door. Outside, the town grows quiet. Smoke rises gently from hundreds of chimneys. Families gather around simple evening meals. On many tables rests a loaf of bread baked only hours earlier. Few people stop to think about the long day behind that single loaf. The early morning fire, the heavy sacks of flour, the burning heat, the careful measurements, the long hours standing beside the oven, the endless labor hidden inside something so ordinary. Yet perhaps that is the greatest achievement of the medieval baker. When his work is done well, people hardly notice it at all. They simply break the bread, share it with those they love, and give quiet thanks for another day. As the evening grows quieter and the bakery finally rests, this is the perfect time to explore some of the stranger stories surrounding bread. At first glance, a loaf of bread seems wonderfully ordinary. Flour, water, salt, fire, simple ingredients, simple process. Yet throughout medieval Europe, bread carried meanings far beyond its humble appearance. It shaped traditions, influenced religion, and even inspired superstitions that survived for centuries. Let's begin with something surprisingly familiar. Have you ever dropped a piece of bread on the floor? Today, most people simply pick it up or throw it away. But many medieval families believed bread deserved much greater respect. Food was precious. Growing grain demanded months of hard work. Every seed depended on good weather. Every harvest carried uncertainty. Because of this, some people believed it was unlucky to waste bread. If a loaf accidentally fell to the ground, a person might gently pick it up, kiss it, and make the sign of the cross before placing it back on the table. This small gesture wasn't magic, it was gratitude, a quiet reminder that bread represented life itself. Another curious custom involved cutting bread. In some regions, people avoided placing a loaf upside down. Doing so was believed to invite bad luck. No one could say exactly where this belief began. Perhaps it was connected to religion. Perhaps it simply reminded people to treat food with care. Whatever its origin, the tradition lasted for generations. Bread also played an important role in hospitality. Imagine arriving at a stranger's home after a long journey. Travel in medieval Europe could be slow, cold, and exhausting. Offering a guest fresh bread was more than kindness, it was a promise of peace. Sharing bread meant, for tonight, you are safe here. In many villages, breaking bread together symbolized trust. Enemies could become friends over a shared meal. Neighbors settled disagreements while sitting around a wooden table. Bread quietly connected people in ways that words sometimes could not. Not all bread looked the same. Different regions created their own recipes using local grains. Northern Europe often relied on rye. Southern Europe favored wheat. Mountain villages experimented with barley. Coastal communities sometimes mixed grains depending on what ships brought into port. Each loaf reflected the landscape from which it came. Some bread was round, some long. Others were flat and thin. No two villages baked exactly alike. Then there were festival breads. These special loaves appeared during religious celebrations, weddings, and important holidays. Some were decorated with braided dough, others carried simple patterns cut into the crust before baking. These decorations weren't only beautiful, they helped identify which family had baked each loaf before communal baking sessions. One fascinating detail often surprises modern historians. Many families did not own their own ovens. Building a large stone oven required considerable time, money, and skill. Instead, entire villages sometimes shared a communal oven. On baking day, families arrived carrying prepared dough wrapped in cloth. The village baker, or an appointed oven keeper, carefully organized dozens of loaves inside the great stone oven. Each loaf needed a small mark. Our long day has finally come to an end. The marketplace has fallen silent. The last customers have returned to their homes. The bakery doors are closed. Only a faint orange glow remains inside the cooling stone oven. Outside, the medieval town grows peaceful once more. The narrow streets are almost empty. Only the occasional sound of distant footsteps or the gentle creak of a wooden cart breaks the evening silence. The stars slowly appear overhead. For the baker, however, rest never lasts very long, and only a few short hours before the first hint of sunrise, the entire routine will begin again. As we look back over everything we have experienced today, one question remains. Would you really survive 1 week as a medieval baker? At first, the answer might seem simple. After all, baking bread doesn't sound especially dangerous. Many of us bake at home. We mix flour, we knead dough, we wait patiently while the oven works its magic. But medieval baking was something entirely different. Imagine waking every morning, long before anyone else, not once, not twice, but every single day. There were no holidays, no weekends, no alarm clocks. Your body simply learned to wake in darkness. You would spend hours lifting heavy sacks of flour, kneading dough by hand, feeding an enormous stone oven with endless piles of firewood, working beside intense heat while smoke filled the air. Your hands would become rough, your shoulders sore, your clothes permanently scented with ash and flour. And even after all that effort, there would still be customers waiting, inspectors checking your bread, prices changing with every harvest, the constant worry that poor weather or a failed crop might leave your family without enough money to survive. Every loaf carried responsibility. Every mistake carried consequences. Yet despite all these hardships, the medieval baker performed one of society's most important jobs. Kings could command armies. Merchants could fill markets. Craftsmen could build magnificent cathedrals. But none of them could work for very long without food, and so, quietly, without fame. The baker became one of the people who kept an entire town alive. There is something deeply admirable about that. History often celebrates great leaders, powerful queens, and famous warriors. Their names fill books. Their victories are remembered for centuries. But the baker, like the farmer, the miller, and countless ordinary workers, rarely appears in those stories. Their names have mostly disappeared, yet every morning they made certain that children had breakfast. Travelers carried food for long journeys. Families gathered around warm meals. Their contribution was ordinary, but also essential. Perhaps that is one of history's greatest lessons. The world has always depended not only on extraordinary people, but on millions of ordinary ones. People who quietly did difficult work without expecting recognition. As the centuries passed, the life of the baker slowly changed. Windmills became more efficient, water mills ground flour more quickly, new ovens improved baking. Later, industrial machines transformed bread production entirely. Today, a single modern bakery can produce thousands of loaves in just one day. Machines knead the dough, conveyor belts move the bread, computers monitor temperatures with incredible precision. Many of the dangers faced by medieval bakers have disappeared, yet in some ways, their legacy remains. Walk into almost any bakery today, and you'll still notice familiar sights. The comforting smell of fresh bread, warm ovens, flour dust resting lightly on wooden tables, a baker rising before dawn, while the rest of the world sleeps. Some traditions survive because they simply work. Others survive because they remind us of where we came from. Bread continues to bring people together. Families still gather around the dinner table. Friends still share meals. Communities still celebrate with freshly baked loaves during holidays and special occasions. Thousands of years have passed, yet something so simple continues connecting us all. Perhaps that is why bread has always meant more than food. It represents comfort, home, family, hope, and survival. Now, our journey through medieval history is almost complete. The ovens have cooled, the market square has emptied, the baker has finally returned home. Tomorrow, before the stars have faded, he will begin again. But tonight, he rests. And perhaps, after spending this quiet evening beside the warm glow of a medieval oven, you can also rest. Thank you for joining me on this peaceful journey into the everyday life of a medieval baker. If you enjoyed traveling through history together, there are countless more stories waiting to be explored. The quiet lives of Roman farmers, the hidden routines of Viking villages, the peaceful monasteries of medieval Europe, and many other forgotten corners of the past. But for now, the fire has grown dim. The streets are silent. The town sleeps. So close your eyes. Take one final slow breath and allow the gentle echoes of history to fade softly into the night. Good night, and sleep well.